So find out what all the excitement is about by going to my website, mkaku.org, mkaku.org. Well, let's move on now, and let's take the next listener phone call.
Dr. Kaku, this is Larry Chen, listening to you on GCN from New York. I'd like to ask, since they preserved Einstein's brain, wouldn't it be strategic to actually clone Albert Einstein as soon as they can? Because that brain tissue is not getting any younger, which means it's degrading. If it's degrading, maybe the genetic material will eventually be useless someday. So wouldn't it be wise to record Einstein's DNA in order to see if we can make some improvements on it, or just simply clone Albert Einstein multiple times? I disagree with your assessment that that a clone would necessarily have to have the exact same conditions of life as the original Albert Einstein. I believe that behavior is mostly genetic, so a clone of Albert Einstein would more or less behave exactly like him, regardless of socioeconomic status. What do you think?
Well, you raise a whole bunch of different philosophical, biological, and physical questions, so let's try to take them one at a time. First of all, when Einstein was alive, he said basically that his body would be reduced to ashes and placed in some place that is still relatively unknown. Historians have tried to figure out where the ashes are. But what happened was, during the autopsy, the doctor in charge realized that in his hands he was holding the brain of one of the greatest scientists of many centuries. So he took it home. That's right. He took Einstein's brain home and preserved it in liquid and kept it in his living room for several years. Every once in a while, he would take splices of Einstein's brains and mail it to other scientists to see whether they could figure out what was the secret of Einstein's genius. And in fact, the brain went across country. He put the brain in his car once. And the exploits of this doctor who had Einstein's brain in his car and in his living room is documented in a documentary. There's even a documentary tracing where Einstein's brain went. Well, Einstein's brain has been looked at because, of course, slices of it are still at Princeton. And they find that, well, for the most part, there's really nothing so unusual about it, at least looking at the basic form of the brain, except there's one area which is thicker than normal, and that thicker than normal area of the brain deals with abstract thought that requires imagination, abstract thinking. That tended to be thicker than the rest of Einstein's brain. But for the most part, most people that have studied the brain say that it's really not much different from the average person's brain, except for that one little area that was more thickened than normal. Now, then the question is, well, what about genetics? If you take a look at the overall shape of Einstein's brain, maybe that's misleading. Maybe you have to get it down to the neuron level to find out the secret of Einstein's genius. Well, the brain was preserved in formaldehyde. And formaldehyde, as you know, destroys tissue, a delicate tissue anyway. And so we're not sure how much of Einstein's brains can be reconstructed. Of course, we can do it with a tiny fraction of his brain, but again, it was preserved in formaldehyde, and it's not known how much DNA can be retrieved. But let's take a short commercial break, and after the break, we're going to continue with Science Fantastic. Michio Kaku. Well, before the break, we had a call from somebody who said that, well, we do have Einstein's brain. It's been preserved. It's degraded, but it has been preserved. So why not try to clone him and bring him back? And perhaps genetics is all that's necessary. Perhaps upbringing, memories, of the way he was taught when he was a child, maybe all that's irrelevant. Maybe it's just down to the question of genetics. Well, yes and no. There have been people, for example, Professor Licken in the Midwest, who made a career out of studying identical twins that were separated in childhood. And then, of course, you trace their intellectual and physical history over the years, these twins were separated, so they did not have any social interactions with each other. And he found out something rather interesting. On a scale of different kinds of activities, he found that roughly 50% of these kinds of characteristics were astonishingly identical between these two twins. The other 50%, less so. And so they begin to diverge. So you're not going to get identical twins. And as one person said, if you were to try to clone Hitler and bring back Hitler as a child, you might wind up as a second-rate artist. This is, of course, what Hitler was before he shot to fame. And so the question is, of that 50% that is not genetic, then how would that influence that person's behavior? Well, of course, some people believe that most behavior is learned, not genetic at all. That if you are raised in a family of thieves, for example, then what you think is good or bad or worth emulating is a question of how much you can steal. So what happens if one twin is raised in a family of thieves and another twin is raised in a family of, well, let's say professors? You would probably find that the kids wind up quite different. So some people believe that, yeah, if you could clone Einstein, you would come back with a person that was very inquisitive, very easy to learn mathematics and different kinds of characteristics, but could wind up as a criminal or somebody that totally deviates from what you would expect a Nobel Prize winner to be like. Well, that's of course all hypothetical, but it does remain to be seen how much genetic material is left of the brain of Albert Einstein. Right now, if you watch these crime stories on TV, you can realize that a piece of tissue that you can barely see, a piece of tissue that is so tiny that you think that there's nothing there, but you can, from that, regenerate the genome of the organism that created it. So we get better and better at doing it, and we can even begin the process of cloning ancient animals. Now, of course, we have not yet been able to clone a dinosaur. The dinosaurs were wiped out 65 or so million years ago, and we do not have any intact DNA going back that far. But yeah, it does turn out that we can bring back some extinct animals. Animals that were extinct several decades ago can in fact be brought back if we have enough good tissue that can then be implanted into, let's say, a female animal that is healthy. So it is possible to bring back certain life forms if you have enough usable DNA, but it's not clear how much of Einstein's DNA is still usable. Okay, well, moving on, what I'm going to do now